For centuries, there's been this mysterious disease haunting humanity. It's a condition that just destroys tissue, deforms limbs, and has a name that sounds like it's straight out of a horror story: the anthill foot.
And get this, this isn't some new thing. This disease was actually described in ancient Indian texts. They called it Pada Valmika, which literally translates to anthill foot. And you know what? It's a disturbingly accurate name for a condition that makes the foot swell up and develop these little tunnels or sinuses that look exactly like the entrances to an ant colony.
So when doctors are looking at this, there's a classic trio of signs they look for. It usually starts with a slow, painless swelling. Then those draining tunnels start to form. And finally, a discharge comes out that has these tiny particles in it called grains. These grains are actually little colonies of whatever is causing the infection.
What's really staggering is where this shows up. A whopping 70% of all these infections happen in the foot. This is also why it got another historical name, Madura foot, after it was first described way back in the 1840s in the city of Madurai, India.
Okay, but here's the central mystery. This is the twist that makes this disease so incredibly hard to treat. Mycetoma, which is what we call it now, isn't actually a single disease. Nope, it's more like a clinical disguise for two totally different culprits. So, on one hand, you've got mycetoma. That's caused by a fungus, and you treat it with antifungal drugs and often surgery. But on the other hand, there's actinomycetoma, which is caused by bacteria and treated with simple antibiotics. They look almost identical, but their treatments are worlds apart. And if you give the wrong one, the disease just relentlessly progresses, destroying tissue and bone.
So you can see the problem, right? This similarity creates this huge diagnostic challenge. Because these two forms look so much alike, telling them apart is both incredibly difficult and absolutely critical.
And the stakes? They could not be higher. Without a clear diagnosis, mycetoma can be mistaken for a whole bunch of other things, from simple cysts and tumors to bone tuberculosis and even a type of bone cancer. I mean, just imagine the consequences of getting that diagnosis wrong.
Now, the traditional way to figure out what's really going on involves taking a tissue sample and trying to grow it in a lab or look at it under a microscope. But the thing is, these methods are slow, they can be really invasive, and maybe most importantly, they're often completely unavailable in the remote, rural areas where this disease hits the hardest.
But what if the answer wasn't some complex, expensive lab test? What if it was something far, far simpler? What if the key to solving this whole mystery was just a thin needle?
This is where a technique called fine needle aspiration cytology, or FNAC for short, comes into the picture. And honestly, it's a remarkably straightforward procedure. A doctor just uses a very thin needle to pull out a small sample of fluid and cells right from the swelling.
The process itself is so direct, so simple. A needle goes in, a small sample comes out, and it's put on a glass slide. Then, under microscope, a trained eye can almost immediately tell the difference between the branching fungus and the stringy bacteria. It's that fast.
And the science totally confirms it. This simple needle technique is just as accurate as the much more invasive and slow histopathology. I mean, this quote really says it all. It gives you the right answer right away. Just think about what this really means. You have a procedure that's accurate, it's cheap, it's fast, and it's not a big deal for the patient. For a disease that thrives in places with very few resources, this is, well, it's nothing short of a revolution in how we diagnose it.
So what does this breakthrough actually mean for the patient on the ground? It means everything. It's literally the difference between getting a cure and suffering a crippling disability for life.
Because with a quick FNAC diagnosis, a doctor can confidently say, okay, this is fungal, we need antifungals. Or, this is bacterial, let's start antibiotics. Making that right call early on stops the disease dead in its tracks. It prevents the severe disfigurement and, yes, the amputations that happen when the infection is just left to spread. So let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. Because this isn't just some fascinating medical mystery. It's a major global health problem that's been hiding in plain sight for way too long. You see, mycetoma is most common in a very specific part of the world, a region that scientists call the mycetoma belt. It's this zone that stretches across the tropical and subtropical areas of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, places that are often defined by their dry climates and rural economies. And who gets this disease? It's not random. It overwhelmingly affects people who work the land: farmers, herdsmen, field workers. They get infected through a tiny, everyday injury, like a thorn prick, often because they're working barefoot in contaminated soil.
At its heart, this is a disease of poverty, and it strikes the very people who have the least access to healthcare.
And because it mainly affects these poor, rural populations, mycetoma was just tragically ignored by the global health community for decades. That's why it was such a monumental deal when, in 2016, the World Health Organization finally listed it as a neglected tropical disease. This recognition brings attention, it brings resources, and it's why an inexpensive, accessible tool like FAQ isn't just a convenience, it's an absolute lifeline.
And that really leaves us with a powerful final thought. The core mystery of the anthill foot, a puzzle that's led to countless amputations and disabilities for centuries, can be solved with a single, inexpensive needle. The challenge isn't about the science anymore. It's about bridging the gap between this elegant solution and the people who desperately need it. It's a question of access, awareness, and whether we have the collective will to finally end the neglect.